If you want zero surprises in your remodel, instead of putting up with vague estimates or making expensive decisions under pressure or getting a bunch of change orders that wreck your budget, stay with me and I'll explain to you the process that we've used for the last 20 years that eliminates all of that before construction even starts. So this idea of the 3-bid rule, you get 3 different contractors that come to your house and they walk the house, you're telling them your ideas, and then they're gonna start throwing out numbers. But you've got to keep in mind is that that contractor has no information that's gonna help them formulate that number. So really what they're doing is throwing spaghetti at the wall and they're just seeing what sticks. There's no defined scope of work. So they don't have a set of plans or specifications. So there's really no way for them to actually come up with numbers. We get calls 2 to 3 times a week of people who have already made a few phone calls and they may have even had some people come out. They're usually pretty frustrated because they're just like, I don't understand why these numbers are just all over the place or why they are so wildly different. But we have to explain to these clients that the only way that we can truly be on the same page is for you to have some sort of a plan. And sometimes people who get wrapped up into these contracts, they see midway through that it was some sort of a problem. Maybe they had a really good relationship or they were communicating really well with their contractor at the very beginning and then somewhere it started to slide. It's because there was just a lack of information going into the project, and that's really what hurts most people. The fix isn't finding a better contractor, it's actually fixing what happens before someone ever even shows up or understanding what that pre-construction process is. When we start our process, we have a list of things to do. Internally, it's a lot. We don't want the client to be overwhelmed with like the number of steps, but internally, we're doing a lot of things because we're collecting data effectively. We're not only hearing what you're saying and trying to make our best interpretation, just like we talked about at the beginning, but then we're having multiple iterations or conversations about that thing to make sure that we understood it correctly. We're going to put it on paper, we're going to add some color to it, and then we're going to make sure that our interpretations of that were the same. So starting back at some of the beginning steps, we're actually going to come into the house and do what we call a scan. Instead of using a lot of tape measures now, we're actually utilizing a lot of LiDAR technology. So we will come into the space and do a series of different LiDAR scans. Some of those are going to be used to help create our CAD models. And then some of them are actually just for informational purposes only. When we didn't have some of this technology, for example, we would rely on either some phone pictures or videos to make sure that we had the information that we needed. When we came back to the office, we might want to know what the existing door style was or what the existing hardware color was. And if we're trying to do a remodel and we're matching some of the existing, we would want to know what those things were. And sometimes maybe in the pictures or the videos, we didn't quite capture exactly what it was we're looking for. Or maybe we're looking for an HVAC register on the ceiling and we didn't get a picture or a video of that part of the ceiling. So we actually do a Matterport scan, and a Matterport camera is a 365-degree rotational camera shooting straight out, and then it's shooting kind of straight down and then also straight up. Then it's also spinning 360 degrees. So this gives us a really useful model so that when we leave the house, we can actually go back to this tool and use it to walk around the house virtually and be able to see all of those different details. When we used to not have that information, we had to schedule a time to come back, or maybe we were even asking a client to take a picture and send it to us. And that's just not a professional way to do business. So the second phase of pre-construction is where your designer is layering in all of the finished materials, paint colors, any textures, wallpaper. We're putting the physical materials into that model that we created. After we've gathered all of that information, that third step is actually where we do what we call a site visit. This is the beginning of what we would call kind of our transfer from information in pre-construction and the design phase, and that slow transition or migration to the actual construction portion of the project. That's the time when I'm actually now bringing in my project manager for that project, and we're starting to get him involved so that he understands or has a good understanding of the conversations that we're having with the client and that we have had with the client up to that point. We can transition to more of the construction side of this pre-construction process. This is when we're actually bringing our trades to the job site and they are physically evaluating the existing site. This is an important step that I think a lot of contractors miss or get wrong. Maybe they're afraid that the client is going to take those subcontractors and try to use them for themselves. But one thing that's important to understand is a lot of times these subcontractors, they may just be bidding directly from the plans. And while those plans may look very robust, it's not truly a qualified proposal unless that subcontractor has been out on the site to actually see the existing conditions of the building, especially in a remodel or an addition project. The electrician is going to check for the electrical panel. He's going to see if there's enough space to add the circuitry that maybe needs to be added for the project. The HVAC guy is trying to find out if the existing HVAC unit is big enough or even equipped to handle the new addition space, for example. Can we extend the existing ductwork? Or do we need another unit? Do we need to upgrade the existing unit? Or do we need to add another unit or a mini split? These are all things that are super important because they may not be specified perfectly on the plan. And sometimes everything works on paper, but it's not a true representation of what's actually happening in the field. And again, this is super important because we see this happen all the time where the electrician has bid from the plans. He shows up on day one and there's already a change order because he's like, dude, you got to upgrade your panel or we need a sub panel. And this is a cost that can't be avoided. This is just something that's going to fall on your lap as a client, and you're going to have to pay for that. In order for him to meet minimum code, he's got to do these things. He's forced to do these things. If you've signed a contract and that contract says that here's the scope and he does run into something that was truly unforeseen for him, your contractor's lack of planning doesn't always remove your liability from having to pay for these things down the line. At this point, our subcontractors are starting to deliver us numbers, and those numbers are based on the plans and the fact that they've seen the site and they understand the complexity based on the current site conditions. Basically where real pricing meets like the real scope. Then the final stage is actually the binder that we're building for every client. That binder is effectively a culmination of all of the information that we've gathered together. All of the decisions that we've made throughout this process, they're all documented and then put into this binder. Everything's in there all the way to the very end. We put a sample contract in the back of that, and we're not bringing you in to try to sign the contract at that point. We want to give you a draft contract so that you have an opportunity to read through it. We never have people sign these. Effectively, it just becomes a snapshot in time. But 9 times out of 10, once you're really faced with making that final signature, you may say, you know what, we want to add something, or maybe something was just not so important and we want to actually take it out. It's not uncommon at all, and that's totally fine. But the whole idea there is that we send you home with everything, and that gives you something to actually take home and read at your leisure instead of having somebody kind of standing over you trying to get you to sign a contract. Just recently, we actually delivered this proposal to a client, and at the very end, they said, hey, where's the new heat and air unit that we have for this upstairs space? We literally looked at each other and said, we don't actually have a new unit for the space. The unit that's there is adequate. We did figure that out through this process. But the bottom line is that we weren't asking them to sign that construction document when we got to the delivery portion. So now they've seen this and they were able to recognize that that wasn't there. At least we can fix this before we got into construction. I always like to use the analogy of dating before getting married. When people call, they're like, come to my house, give me an estimate, you know, let's sign the construction contract quick. Construction is still a pretty big commitment. While it might not be as big of a commitment as marriage, it's still a big one. Some people are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on remodels. It should be important to get this right. Let's not jump into that before we get to know each other a little bit. The bottom line is that you're never trapped in this process. Like, we want you to actually feel like you have the ability to exit at any time. So I don't want you to feel like you're trapped or you're married to me before we've just gotten to know each other a little bit. So the only way that we do contracts at K-Squared is what they call a fixed price contract. That means that we're giving you a price and that number is the number. Now, sometimes people mistake that for us not having any change orders. And unfortunately, that's not realistic still. For one, you as the client may decide that you want something else or you want to change something in the middle of the project, and that's okay. Sometimes it's still feasible to do that. So maybe at the very beginning in pre-construction, you decided that you didn't like the cost of a sink, but you really liked the sink itself. Well, maybe at some point after you sign the contract, you're losing sleep about that decision, and you come back to us and say, hey, we'd really still like to do that really nice sink. Is that a possibility that we could do that? Sure, that's fine. But obviously that cost still gets then reapplied to your project, and any change in labor or scope that may affect would also be a change order. So it's a little bit unrealistic to say that there would be no change orders, but the idea is that they're extremely limited and they're for truly those unforeseen things that didn't get captured. But again, in more of your traditional, you know, especially in that 3-bid process, you're going to get such a low level, low information proposal and or estimate, and then you're going to sign a contract for that scope. But what you're trying to do in pre-construction is actually mitigate or minimize as many of those problems as you can. We're just trying to solve all of the problems that we can feasibly solve before construction. What people don't realize is that that's where contractors give themselves a bad name. They're trying to solve your problems that they didn't solve beforehand, and that just costs you money. So it's no longer a range and it's no longer an estimate. It's actually real numbers and it's based on real pricing, real scope. So we really have a good idea of what it is that we're actually doing and what we're building for the client now. And if there's something larger that's actually changing the original range that we provided to a client, we're keeping them aware of these so that when we get to this proposal delivery stage, we're not actually talking about numbers that we haven't already talked about. And that's why actually our conversion rate is really high once we get to this point. It's because most projects probably die because of cost, or at least the surprise of the cost at the end. We might be off by a few $1,000s. It's very rare that we're anything more than that. When we're getting to the end, we're just not giving you this big surprise where you say, I just can't do this. Knowing the process is only half of it. The other half is knowing what questions to ask before you hire anyone. And then also what the wrong answers actually sound like.